What is up, Hot Gosslings? It is an almost new year, but an actively new team. Just for inclusivity's sake, I guess I will say who I am and what my pronouns are. So I'm Arande. I use he, him, his for my pronouns, but also like kind of don't care, use whatever pops into your mind. And who else do we have here?
Hi, I'm Mackenzie, longtime listener, first time caller. I'm new with Speak About It. My pronouns are she, they, interchangeably. And our guest today is Eva, but I will allow them to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about what their role is at Planned Parenthood.
Hi, I'm Eva. I use they, them pronouns. I am new at Planned Parenthood of Northern New England, and I am the Population Health Program Manager for Maine. We are responsible for doing community engagement work and health equity. And so sometimes that means doing sex education work with adults, whatever adults mean. And sometimes that means doing internal systems work to make Planned Parenthood services even more accessible and equitable for all kinds of people. Just like be really clear and say, I am not a clinician. We're going to talk about sex ed stuff, but I am not medically licensed. We're going to talk about sex education broadly.
Cool. That is good to specify. Thank you.
Yeah.
And also, like Mackenzie and myself, we're also not doctors. We're not clinicians. So a lot of this is like all from the like emotional health and like interpersonal side, not the medical side.
Totally. So what exactly are we talking about today, y'all?
Let's talk about sexually transmitted infections. There's actually a lot to talk about. We did a previous episode, so yeah, we've got a lot to say.
Yeah, about 17 episodes ago, we did one with Ren from the Franning Peabody Center, right?
Yes, yeah. Hot Goss is so old. I am so old. What is time? One of the big things that stood out to me from that conversation, we talked a lot about stigma related to STIs. Like Ren was really passionate about that, and that really stuck with me. And so I guess like Eva, I'm curious about, have you seen the same thing with like a lot of stigma? And I guess also what's interesting to me is like your work has been in a different community than and different demographics than Ren's was. And so I guess I'm just curious about just like any stigma about talking about STI status or testing or any of that stuff.
Yeah. So yes, there's still stigma around STIs. At Planned Parenthood of Northern New England, when we're doing like community-based sex education work, we often start our workshops with conversations around STI stigma. And that's just sort of like to break the ice and get it up, open up the space so people can like process feelings and thoughts and experiences and myths around STIs before we even get into like educational information. And on the other side, sort of some of our work is like through healthcare delivery. We get phone calls all the time around people who've just had like a recent scary thing happen, like maybe an exposure or a partner has like showed up positive for something and they just got that information. People are often calling in a place of emergency, like that is a scary moment. And so thinking about like how that feels and how that would feed into stigma is like a very real experience for people. I think the thing that's really important is that we're really prepared to talk to people and like hold space for that experience. And at the same time, like it's actually not that big of a deal to just treat like the medical part of it is like the screening, the testing, treatment part is pretty straightforward and routine. But we are really prepared to hold space for folks that are having like that like fear and mental health experience that is really challenging when it comes to STIs. We're not like 2021, we're still experiencing the sort of cultural perspective on what it means to even just get tested for STIs or getting screened for STIs, even if you're not like presenting symptoms and what that feels like as an individual.
It's so interesting. It's so like I don't say bittersweet, but it's so multifaceted, right? That it's like it's good to hear that it's not just one demographic that is like wrestling with these things and wrestling with the stigma. But it's also like so disheartening that anyone's dealing with it. And I'm so, I don't know, like so inspired by the fact that there's people like yourself that are trying to work to lower that stigma across different demographics. So like, and like letting people know you're not alone, right? Like if you're like dealing with this and like trying to like wrestle with the stigma, like it's not just you and like your people, that it's kind of a broader issue. So thank you.
You know, I think it's hard to think about anything lately without, you know, framing it in a new way or a new way to understand it because of the impacts of the pandemic. And I'm wondering how the pandemic has changed any of what you just talked about in regards to stigma or access to care.
It was real. It like impacted healthcare across the board in all kinds of ways. Something that's like really amazing and I'm so proud of around Planned Parenthood is that we never shut down. We were open the whole time. So incredibly proud of that. On top of that, there was no patient to staff, no staff to staff, and no staff to patient transmission of COVID. The whole time staying open. We reduced our patient flow significantly. We haven't been seeing the same number of people daily throughout the pandemic that we did pre-pandemic. All of a sudden, people's ability to get in and get tested, get any kind of care that wasn't COVID related was reduced, even in places that are focused on sexual and reproductive health. On the other side, people were still having a lot of sex. And like there was talking to clinicians and talking to the folks in healthcare centers who were doing regular exams and doing screenings and doing testings for STIs, nothing slowed down. Just because people were at home, that does not mean they weren't having sex. That doesn't mean people still no longer needed access to sexual reproductive care. So I think that's like a really important highlight that I think, especially for folks that maybe are partnered and live with a partner, you might not recognize how important it still was for individuals and single people to be getting out there and like figuring out what like a harm reduction model is, to be like, I know I'm not supposed to be interacting with others, but I'm lonely or I need to have sex, and that's okay. And because people were still getting care. So I think that's something that I really am proud of talking about around Planned Parenthood's work. And then also just part of destigmatizing people who have sex, and knowing that people were, being really responsible about, while they were making choices that in one way might feel risky around COVID, they were still making intelligent choices and like harm reduction choices around making sure they're getting tested.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting. Like one of the things that you said is kind of like the like peeking behind the curtain, like exactly why we're doing this like revisit of this topic, that like people were still definitely like full on dating. Literally like the first bunch of texts I got for easily that first week was like, hey, can I still hook up with people? Like, is it okay for me going on dates? Do you remember like what was it, like New York State, like their like Department of Health issued those like guidelines for sex, and like use glory holes, have orgies, and you're like, wait, what? So yeah, there like definitely was a lot of conversation about all of this. And so Eva and I, we only met like a few weeks ago, like a few weeks, months or something. Yeah. And in that early conversation, you also mentioned that there's some new STIs on the rise. And I was like, whoa, like these two facts definitely need to come together, right? If people are definitely hooking up still and not necessarily always like talking about getting tested, and there's new things to be tested for, we should probably just like have a conversation about that. And so, and I know if like, we in sex ed hadn't heard about these things, and a lot of folks that are not in sex ed probably have not heard about them. So is there any information that you can give us about like some of these like new STIs that we know exist but don't know anything about?
Yes. And I was really excited because this was new information to me as well. In the moment when we first met and we were talking about that, and I have a twist on that story. The twist is the new STI is not new. It's been around forever. It is called mycoplasma genitalium, MGen for short, and it was first discovered in the 1980s. This is what's new. We now have testing and treatment guidelines. So this STI that I was mentioning, that I didn't know about, that I was just learning about, and that lots of other sex educators, like people just out in the world doing sex, might not know about, because it's not one of the like the baseline ones when people are like, make sure you're getting screened for HIV, STI, gonorrhea, chlamydia, like that, like sort of normal set. And there's many more, but those are the ones that are like, we're often, and especially in public health, are being like pushed all the time. A few years ago, there was like a 2-paragraph like highlight on MGen existing, but there wasn't a lot of information around like, what do we do about testing? What do we do about treatment? And now we have information. So it's been around since the 1980s, and about 1% of the general population has MGen. For comparison, 3% have chlamydia, and about 0.4% have gonorrhea. So MGen is not super uncommon. What's really important to know, and like, we don't want to talk about this where people are like, oh gosh, there's something else I need to be worried about. That's really not this. It's actually, this is great. This is all great news, because the way MGen is transmitted, it's the same as chlamydia. So fluid transmission during sex. So if you're someone who is really on top of making sure you are protecting yourself against STIs generally. You're probably doing the right thing to protect yourself against MGen. And then the symptoms are also very similar to chlamydia. What we are also seeing is that it's a little bit less severe and it's a little bit less common than chlamydia. So that's MGen. Like that's the baseline information that we need to know about it. The deal is that that's sort of special and just it's about language, right? People go get screened for STIs. So if you're someone like maybe you're polyamorous, you practice ethical non-monogamy, you're just dating right now, you're not in a monogamous relationship. Maybe you get screened regularly. This is something that you do just as a prevention tactic. Screening is something you do when you are not presenting with symptoms, right? You're just like living your life, staying on top of the stuff. There are STIs out there, right, that you can be carrying, but not have symptoms for. And that's really valuable and important to know that, especially so that you're protecting your partners. There are also times where you might have a new symptom. Something might happen and you might see like, I needed to get this checked out, right? So if you're going and getting tested, that's because you're presenting symptoms. So screening, no symptoms, testing, symptoms, right? You're only going to get tested for MGen because you're presenting with symptoms that are MGen similar, right? That are like something around that. We're not currently screening for MGen. Great.
Do you know why?
I kind of know why. Again, this is like new information to me, but when I was talking about this with one of our clinicians, we're really talking about like funding for the science part of healthcare is slow if it's not a pressing emergency. We've gotten to see amazing things around COVID, right? This was like so much money and so much person power went into, let's figure this out. Let's figure out this virus that's getting spread around really quickly. Let's figure out how to test for it. Let's figure out how to vaccinate against it. And now we're getting new things around what are pills that we can use to treat it, right? When it comes to STIs, especially something like this, it's been around for a really long time. And it has taken until 2021 this year to actually just have a test for it, to be like, symptoms are presenting, we have a test we can use and actually return results within a kind of reasonable period of time.
I feel like this past year, like everybody, like on a massive scale, has become so acutely aware of how different infections and viruses can mutate or differ and become like entirely new concerns to our health. And, you know, what you were saying about, you know, getting screened or, you know, getting tested when you're for something specific, only when you are experiencing symptoms. I feel like that's been pretty commonplace with COVID. And I also have seen an increase in people taking caution and getting screened for COVID, even when they aren't presenting symptoms, as an act of like safety and community care. And I am hopeful, or, you know, we can hope that you know, ideology shifts to also like STI screening and community care. And what do you think are the best ways and resources for folks to stay updated about STIs?
Yeah. So, I mean, just to promote my own organization, Planned Parenthood actually has a really cute STI library. MGen's not up there yet. I'm sure it will be soon, especially because in early 2022, I know that Planned Parenthood of Northern New England is going to start offering testing and treatment for MGen. Keep your eyes peeled on the website, the Planned Parenthood of Northern New England website, for that information. And I believe most places will also, that one might go get tested for STIs, will also start doing MGen soon. But Planned Parenthood has a great STI library. So if you want to just like know a little bit more about STIs generally, about any particular one, there's just sort of like this little, you can just click a different button for each STI, and it's like really simple. You're not going to get a bunch of like spooky pictures. Pretty straightforward. You know, the CDC website is a place you can get really up-to-date information around all kinds of health information. Personally, I find it a little bit challenging to read. And that's even someone who's like in public health work. And so if you're looking for sort of like plain language, sweet and simple, that's why I would definitely point to the Planned Parenthood website.
Cool, heard. And that all actually gets also has my brain. So thinking about like MGen existing and me like never knowing about it and everything you just said, has me thinking about like, how do we talk to our partners about testing status? And so the first thing that immediately popped into my mind, and I obviously would love to hear what y'all think, but the first thing that popped into my mind is just that it's always a good idea to bring like testing up and STI status when you're hooking up with people, right? When there's anyone else that is like sexually involved in like the world that you're a part of. And I think that it's one of the pieces that seems like it's like tricky for people is sometimes like this implication, this like imagined implication of that, like, oh, well, like I'm saying that I don't trust them or that I think that they're like dirty or slutty or all these things. And it's like, it doesn't have to be any of that, right? Like this is literally just about health. It's just information. Like just kind of during the pandemic, I started using this expression value neutrality a lot, but like information is just like, it's just information, right? And like if we're a little like just value neutral when we take it in, it's a lot easier kind of downstream because we're actually able to kind of sort through it and figure out how to process it instead of getting caught up on like whether the thing is good or bad. And so if you just kind of like approach this conversation as like a value neutral thing of just like, it's just a thing that I need to know, right? And like how we navigate after that, it'll just make everything smoother. So I think that's a big thing. And then I think Mackenzie, you just said something that kind of related to this. That COVID, I think, has really helped us with like in a lot of this regard because like now it's a part of like everyday life to take these precautionary measures and to have these types of conversations before you're getting together about like who are you hanging out with, like are you wearing masks when you go places, blah blah blah. And so we're kind of used to it now to some extent, and this actually might really help us, or it could help us in our sexual well-being and figuring out the ways that we interact with each other. This is like another like classic speak about it phrase, but like this feels like it's like what we refer to as like a pants on conversation. Yeah. There's so many things that feel so much more, I don't know, like scary, high stakes, intense, whatever word you want to use, like when you're naked and standing in front of someone, you're quite literally baring yourself to them. And so this you might find that you feel a bit more comfortable when you're just like wearing your clothes, like having a casual conversation with this person. And it doesn't feel quite as, the fear of like rejection, those like intense emotions might not be quite as high at that particular moment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. I think
Cool.
it's like pretty like obvious that there are pretty significant parallels between like testing negative for COVID or getting tested for COVID and testing for STIs. And even, do you see that as well? And if so, can you expand on that or just generally add to the conversation about discussing STIs with a partner?
Totally. Yeah, no, I think so much of this is resonating. I have really big, I mean, I have hopes for this and I'm really curious if it will actually play out. But that I mean, I remember talking to other people in sexual reproductive health, HIV prevention and treatment around when we were starting to have all of our conversations around COVID, and so like, you know, pre-vaccine, there's so many conversations I had around consent with people I lived with and people I wanted to be interacting with, where we were like, okay, like, what are your boundaries right now? And there are ways in which this is harm reduction. Like it was so lonely, right? Like wanting to be with other people, even though we're knowing we're not supposed to be like in physical proximity. So like, hey, what works for you right now? What is feeling safe for you? What is okay with you? What are like the things I don't know about you? Like maybe you are caretaking for somebody right now who's like immunocompromised. Maybe like you're immunocompromised. I never knew that about you, my friend. Whatever it is, like, what are you good with?
Can I say one thing about that?
Yeah.
But I think that like that's such a really I think an important piece that people didn't really even notice when like I think a lot of us had an experience where like there's a friend that you found out was immunocompromised and your immediate instinct was to help protect them, right? That I don't know any person I talked to that was like, oh my gosh, can you believe they're immunocompromised? And like that like hurt your opinion of them. Like you're like, oh, okay, cool. Like we need to do this thing to keep this person safe. And I think that like people might find that with like sexual health and wellness as well, right? That like once you know that there's a thing that like extra care needs to be taken, I'm sure like if a person really cares about you, they're going to be like happy to provide that extra service to make sure that you're safe. And so thank you for bringing that part up, because I didn't even realize that parallel until you just said that.
Randy, now I have a little thing that I want to say that popped up when you were discussing this. I just thinking about how some of the most like challenging conversations I had early pandemic was about boundaries and safety. And I think what was so challenging about it was because those are really intimate conversations, maybe with relationships that I didn't consider to be intimate. And I feel like it's really, I feel like consent education and sex education played such a big role in like my ability to have those conversations like properly in a way that was constructive.
Did anyone also like have any amount of like, it felt kind of like dating? Like if you were going to be like, hey, do you want to, does your household want to bubble with my household?
Yeah.
And then I absolutely had a situation where someone was like, we picked somebody else. And I was like, oh no. I just asked someone out and they said no. And there was just, that like there were a lot of those same sort of social experiences through COVID that are so parallel to the dating world or having sex or asking for something that you want and need with somebody. And for them to be able to say yes or no or maybe to that.
You both are so brilliant, and like it's like put together this thing that I don't think we even realize, even though we've had this conversation once before. But it's about the different types of intimacy, right? Mm-hmm. That it's like I think that people assume that this conversation should be like easier because they're like, we're having sex, right? Like this person like may or may not be inside of me, or vice versa, or whatever, or like we'll be like rubbing on each other, whatever. And they're like, oh, we're already intimate, right? And it's so weird, but it's like, yeah, if there's no precedence for emotional intimacy in that situation, then that's a whole new realm that you're exploring and like a whole new set of skills and a set of attachment and connection that you have to get used to. And so Mackenzie, like what you were saying about like it's like having to like talk to your friends and be like, hey, how are you feeling? That's like, yeah, if you haven't had to have that type of intimacy before, even though you're close to them, right? You've done things that make you close to them. That's a whole new level of intimacy, and like that's always scary. That's always big.
Yeah, it's like about like it's like destigmatizing vulnerability, like with the people in your life. I feel like has been a big lesson.
I think that just something to highlight is that it can be way more intimidating to try to bring up a conversation around STI testing and treatment or screening, like just routine screening with a partner you've been with for a while, that you're like already having sex with, versus someone that you're meeting for the first time. And I mean, to the point of COVID, right? Like, I think that it was a lot easier for me in some ways to like have those conversations with friends that I was like, okay, we're going to do like an outside only coffee date. And I'll see you again in like 3 months or something. Cause that, that's how I was socializing. But also the conversations with my partner were sometimes like, wait, what have we decided together? Like, what is it that, and those were sometimes more awkward around like, oh, you're going to do what? Oh, okay, great. But trying to figure out how we were negotiating within our own household, or even like, that sort of other level of intimacy. Like if it was with your family or something, of like conversations you like assume everyone's on the same page and you're not, right? And so that can feel a little bit scarier around STI testing and stuff, to be like, this isn't me really about not trusting you. It's me wanting to just like be in charge of my own health and like take care of you and take care of our community, right? And that's something that I feel like we all did. Lots of like when we started wearing masks in the grocery store, this is like a routine thing. This is just a thing everybody does. Like people who have dental insurance, and maybe I don't know how you get dental care without having dental insurance, but you get your teeth cleaned. Like this is just like preventative care to make sure you have teeth in 20 years, right? And like STI testing and screening is just like preventative care. It's just making sure we know what's up. And like the hope is that this is stuff that we just get used to having conversations around. It's not like about any individual's personal failing. And that goes back to the conversation again around COVID. It's like when someone got like, contracted it, it's highly contagious. A lot of people don't even know where or how. Like they were doing all the things they could think of to be safe and to protect themselves, and it still happened, right?
I think that COVID has really normalized the concept and availability of at-home testing for a lot of people. And I think it's also a really new concept for a lot of people. And it's great for ease and also comfort. Are there any resources at Planned Parenthood or in general that you know of for at-home STI testing?
Yeah, absolutely. So Planned Parenthood of Northern New England is offering at-home testing for some STIs, not the whole panel, but gonorrhea and chlamydia in particular, at home. And that would be for residents of Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire. If you are watching this video and you are somewhere else, I highly recommend just seeking out what your local Planned Parenthood has to offer. And if they don't have anything, you can check out anyone that's doing HIV prevention and treatment work. And often places are having a lot of at-home testing stuff, and possibly at like low cost or free. And then if you're someone who has a little extra cash, there are a lot of for-profit companies that want to send you at-home testing of all kinds. So that's like Google is your friend in this case. And again, hyping Planned Parenthood of Northern New England for residents of Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire.
So I think we're kind of like nearing into like our like closing thoughts and feelings. And so are there any like closing things? Like what are our takeaways? That's like classic hot goss language. What are our takeaways with this? Do you want to go first, Eva?
I think that being brave around what you want to do to protect yourself and your community, and just being open about those conversations, is really admirable and a way to take care of people around you. And it can feel really awkward if it's the first time it's coming up. It can feel awkward if it's the second time coming up. It's awkward for me, and this is my job. But that it's the kind of thing that I'm really hoping that we are all getting closer and closer to just being open and honest with each other, just for general well-being of everyone.
Cool. I love that. I think that's like a really important thing to mention, that like we, and like don't speak for Mackenzie also, but like I suspect we all as sex educators, that like there's still parts of these conversations that's tricky and awkward and uncomfortable. And it's just so if you're a person that is not a sex educator that's like, oh man, this is so scary for me, yeah, you're not alone, right? That like we are paid to do this and think about this, and we still have our feelings about it. So that's, I think, a really important takeaway. And then I think lastly that it's back to that like value neutrality thing. I think that like everything is just information, right? And like our emotions are important information as well, right? And like, and if you're feeling that you want or need a certain thing for your own safety, for your own, even if it isn't safety, if it's just comfort, right? But like that's important and that's worth it, right? But like that is just information, and it's like do something with that information, right? Like it is okay to advocate for yourself, just like feel better in a situation and to be safer in a situation. So that's my thing.
My takeaway is that we've talked about a lot today, and that Eva, you mentioned a lot of really excellent resources in regards to Planned Parenthood. We touched on a lot of different concepts, and we will do a roundup on our blog about where you can access those resources, and where we can go a little bit more into depth on some of the things that we talked about. So keep an eye out for those if you are interested in accessing any of the resources we spoke about today.
Okay. Well, I think in that case, we're so happy, Hot Gosslings, to be back with you. And I think with that, goodbye, Gosslings.
Bye, Gosslings.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. All right, bye.